Now, I would like to show you how to set up the console for a symphonic concert show. More or less, in that series of videos, this is the basic setup for all different kinds of working fields. There are a lot of things in that setup which occur again in the other settings. So if you just watch the video maybe with where I talk about musicals, there are a lot of basics of that. What I'm going to show you in this one will be in that one as well. Here I have the luck of working with a StageTech Aorus Platinum, which is definitely one of my absolutely favorite consoles. Of course, that what I'm showing to you is not only possible on that console. There are plenty of consoles on the market, and I'm showing you my way of working. The only thing what you have to do is to adapt that to other consoles. But in that case, if you have the chance of driving a Ferrari, take the chance. First, I have to configure the console. That means how many buses do I need, how many auxiliaries, how many input channels, and do I need a VCA tree or not. So let's set up a new project, and I turned on the screen recording so that I can show you what is happening in the console as well. So let's go on project and make a new project. So here we see window where we can say how many groups, how many inputs, and whatever we need. You see that right in the moment we have the capacity of 370 DSP input channels. Seems to be high enough, but of course the amount will decrease as soon as I increase the number of buses, groups, auxiliaries, what I add. So first, let's begin here. I need subgroups. I don't need auxiliary small channels, which means it's auxiliary channels without DSP, so without processing. I want the auxiliaries to have DSP. We are not on a broadcast, so I don't need mix minus, but I need subgroups. I need multi-VCA groups. Subgroup means that I can route groups to other groups, and the whole thing we run right now in 48 kilohertz. Fine for me. So there are a lot of talks, chats about 48 or 96 kilohertz. The biggest advantage of 96 kilohertz is you halve the amount of latency. With the high frequencies where you think you should be able, to be honest, for me 48 is still fine, works well. Okay, so what do we need? We don't need a 5.1 control room. Let's put that on 0. We need here for that moment right now, we need a control room to listen to it here in that studio, in that lovely studio where we are. Of course, we need a solo and PFL bus. We need at least one sum. Very often I like to have 2 or 3 sum buses. For example, if I have a sum bus for the PA and a sum bus for the recording, I can switch between these 2 buses, or can say one bus is going to the PA. I can lower it in level, but it will not affect my recording. So I will raise that number, let's say, and always give a little bit spare buses. We have so many DSP power here, so 2 buses I need, let's take 4. Then we have spare buses for future purposes. Subgroups, we have here the mono subgroups, which is 6 subgroups. This is not enough. First, let's get rid of the 5.1. I don't need that. Even if I work with surround buses, I'm not working in 5.1 buses. That's suitable for control rooms, for recordings, and for recording studios, but not in live events. In live events, as soon as I work with surround buses, these are dedicated buses because they are treated totally different from this 5.1. I'm not planning to do pannings with a joystick, which I would have here. So they are more or less static in my work, and so I just use regular subgroups therefore. So right now we have the amount of 24 mono subgroups, more or less sufficient. Let's say we will have 10 stereo groups, and that increases the number. We have here a total amount of buses. Let's go up to 44. So now we have 24 mono buses, 10 stereo buses. We have 8 mono auxiliaries. Mono auxiliaries, we can use it for purposes like feeding the monitor engineer, not with symphonic concerts, but using for monitoring purposes, sending signals wherever I need them, depending on an extra level. And then I need stereo auxiliaries for feeding my reverberation. I try to feed it in stereo. Here I have a lovely Lexicon 960. By the way, concerning reverberation, in the orchestra world, a good reverberation is absolutely essential, because you want to keep it natural and you use so much more reverberation than you use in rock or pop music. When you sit in a concert hall, the most people are sitting behind the reverberation radius. So these people hear more reverberation than direct sound. And this is just for you to imagine how important a good reverberation is. So that's why I demand for machines like this Lexicon 960 or 480 or other plug-in reverberations like Altiverb, which is a convolution reverb, and I got real impulse responses from the real rooms in the world, and so they do very good. But some built-in reverberations or older reverberation machines besides the 480, not fine enough in my taste. So that's very important for me to have a very good reverberation machine. Okay, so I will add, let's say, 4 reverberation machines I need for the natural symphonic orchestra sound. Add some spare. Again, we have more than enough buses. Let's say we use 10 reverberation buses. So we have 10 auxiliaries, 10 stereo auxiliaries, 8 mono. That sums up to 28 buses in total. So that means here we go to 10 and this is left. No mix minus, no tracks for playing back the record, not needed. So we end up with a nice setup of 296 input channels, definitely more than enough, a bunch of sums, groups and auxiliaries. Okay, let's apply that. The console restarts and set up the new configuration. Okay, here we are. So on the very first beginning, I want to know on which channels I'm working, and therefore I name all inputs, I name all outputs, and I will prepare that. Therefore we have here this this input, the label channels. I would say I will do that and I come back as soon as it's done. The labeling is done, but I want to show you and to go through the labeling to see what I've done. So here In the first 4 channels you see A, B, double A, double B. These are my main microphone system, so my suspended microphones. Most of the time I use omnidirectional microphones, therefore suspended in one row on the edge of the orchestra. With the spot microphones I get these single spotted areas of the whole orchestra. So I hear 4 first violins 3 times. And the main microphone system, because of the distance it has to the orchestra, it's much higher than the other microphones, it glues together all the sound. And that's why I achieve a whole sounding orchestra. So that's why I use them. So then we have a typical orchestra setup, so that means 12 first violin players, 10 second violin players, 8 violas, 6 celli, and 4 basses, or in that case it was even a bigger one. It was 14, 12, 10, 8, 6 setup. I use 3 microphones for the first violin, 3 microphones for the second violin, 2 microphones for the viola, 3 for the cello, and 3 for the basses. Here we see, let me go down a bit, I have 2 microphones for the flute, 2 for the oboe, 2 for the clarinet, and 2 for the bassoons. So what does it mean? That means I have a setup of 3 flute players, 3 oboe players, 3 clarinet players, and 3 bassoon players. Why do I need only 2 microphones for each group? This has something to do with the distance from the microphone to the player. I use lovely microphones like the MKH or the KM184. They need a distance to the player, and to be honest, every instrument, every classical instrument, does not sound when you get too close to the instrument. So, what happens if I have a microphone, 1 microphone per player? The relation between the microphones to each other is closer than the relation between the microphone and the musician. And that ends up in a huge comb filter, because player number 1 is nearly at the same level at microphone number 1, which is his microphone, and microphone 2, which is for the second player. So is the signal of the second player to microphone 1, 2, and 3. So this ends up in a mess, and there's a rule. Each microphone has to have a distance of 3 times the distance to the player. As soon as you go to directed microphones, this rule decreases a bit. But the less microphones you use, the less comb filter you will have, and the better it is for the overall sound. In this situation, I as well want to talk about why I insist on good microphones. The microphones from Sennheiser or from Neumann, from these microphones I know, even when the sound is coming from the side, I have a very good frequency response. A lot of microphones show the frequency response in a 0-degree line. I'm absolutely not interested in that, because nearly all signals from the orchestra hit a microphone from the side. That's why I need very good microphone who are able to handle this situation. Okay, let's go on. So the same rule I use for the French horns, which I have here. Then, so it means that I have 3 French horns, or even 4 French horns. That's possible. So 1 microphone for 2 players. Then here I have 2 or 3 trumpet players. So if it's 3 trumpet player, obviously it will be 4 trombones player and 1 tuba. Be aware of how to microphone the tuba and the French horn, as I mentioned in the part before. So here are my everything what I call mallets. So it is harmonic instruments, could be vibraphone, could be xylophone, or as well celesta, piano, or even the harp. So I put that in one family. Then here, my percussions, my timpanis, my grand cassa. Then later on, I have here my reverberation returns. These will be stereo channels later on. FXOV means effect, orchestra, vorne, which means in English front. The next one is effects, orchestra, middle. Effects, orchestra, H, which means the rear of the orchestra. So I use the reverberation machine to create 3 sounds of the orchestra: front, middle, and rear. Let's see how I arrange it, which microphone I feed to which reverberation machine, and let's see which adjustments I will do in the reverberation. I will all show that. So, and then the last machine is for the surround speakers, to put some early reflections in the audience. Then a special point about that console treats VCA in a little bit different way. It's not really called VCA here, it's master-slave groups, and so it gives me the advantage of having as many VCAs as I want, and so I have to dedicate input channels as a master VCA, and that's why I call this channel with a V in the beginning, so that I immediately know what I have. Is this really an input channel or is it a VCA? So I make VCLs for all single sections of the strings, and then I start to build a tree of VCAs. That means all these single sections, violin 1, 2, violas, cello, and contrabass, have a bigger VCA where they are in. This is the VCA called strings. So with that VCA, I can control the whole strings just with one fader. But if I just want to control only the violin 1, I go to VCA violin 1. So then as well, I have a VCA for the French horns and for the brass, because sometimes I really treat them different. Sometimes I want less brass but more French horns. And that's why I'm using 2 VCAs here. Earlier I already mentioned that the horns for me, they are not really brass, they are not really woodwind, they are something in between. Of course, I have a VCA woodwinds here as well, a VCA percussion, a VCA for the soloists, a VCA for my effect returns, then again a VCA for everything except effect returns. So all these channels end up in a VCA called all or everything. And of course not the effect returns, because as soon as I put them in that in the VCA all as well, I would double the effect. Because when I lower the VCA of all, I have less gain sent to the reverberation machine. And that's why as soon as I mute the VCA all, nothing is going into the reverberation machine, and so they are muted automatically. And last but not least, I have the VCA moderator, which means I have it directly next to my VCA orchestra, so I can turn down the VCA orchestra and push the moderators up, because they will never be in the same time. Okay, let's go to the outputs. In my outputs, first I have the stereo VCAs, and the stereo VCAs, again, I have my send to the reverberation machine, so my FX orchestra front, my FX orchestra middle, and FX orchestra rear and surround. Okay, nothing new, nothing surprising about that. And then here I have my monitorings. Same method here. I name my monitors as soon as when I have to do monitors from the front. I name these channels with an M in front so that I immediately know that's a monitor channel, a monitor send. And I use the last stereo channel to give the signals of a reverberation or something to the left right of the orchestra. That's why I'm using a stereo here. Can be done by mono channels as well. I have 2 mono feeds for the solo singers and 1 mono feed for the conductor. That is my outputs configured here. And now we come to a very important point. These are my subgroups. I mentioned that I'm doing the panning quite different. And that's the way how I do it. These are my mono subgroups. I started with the channel 25 because that's much more comfortable to have it here on the 25, and I'm in the range of 8 channels. So I start here with the left, 1/3 left, 2/3 left, 3/3 left. As well, right, 1/3 right, 2/3 right, 3/3 right. To these channels, I send all my inputs to these channels. There, the processing for my panorama is done, so reducing the overtones on the other side. But let's have a closer look to it a bit later. Okay, channel labeling is done. We have to press apply. Okay, the window disappears, and now we have everything here on the surface. Okay. The next step in real life is to do all the patching. So to get all your stage boxes on the right channels, on the channels where you have your input channels. And of course we are now in a studio environment, and right in the moment we don't have a real orchestra, only a virtual orchestra here. So it's a recorded show I have here. I will patch the MIDI inputs from the computer back to the console. This is done here in the input matrix. We have here the MIDI streams from 1, and I can make an auto patch, let's say for 32 channels. So let's do the first 32 channels, and we have here, so from to, I can look, so all the riders where I have some mic inputs or all the things which is connected here to my inputs. So let's see, let's go further. So the next inputs, 32 inputs are done. I have to execute that, and now everything is patched through. And now if I play start, yeah, there we see we have signal here on the console. Yeah, yoo-hoo. That's how it should be. The next step is setting up everything. I start normally with my setup of my panning. I will program my groups. Let's talk a little bit about my panorama. I will show it how it goes. I will bring the groups on top. So it is here, group. That's my layer management where I can arrange my whole console. Every fader can be everything, which for me is very fine. I'm not in that from 1 to 100 all in a row. I want to arrange the console the most comfortable way so that I have to change as less as possible the layers, or I make a layer from 1 to 100 for the line check, but then for the show I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in string sections, woodwind sections, brass sections, so I'm thinking that way. Okay, let's bring the subgroups here on top. So that means here we have the group channels. We have, it was from 25, 8 channels. Let's bring them here right from channel 17, here on layer B, that's fine. Play. Here we go. I put the groups here now on that fader bay. For now, for the video, I put them as well as ghosts or as mirrors on that fader bay, because here we see the good equalizer. And the next what I do, I want to bring them all to 0 dB. That's made very easy. I have the multi-select, hold down the first one and press the second one. Press trim and they are all at 0 dB. The next step, what I have to do, as I said, all inputs are going on these buses. They are not going to the master. They're going to these buses, and from this bus, they are going to the master. So, therefore, I have to route the subgroups to the master. This I do here. I put that here. Now all the channels, you see it here, are assigned to the sum bus. Of course, I want to use panning. So the left bus, I go out of the link group, the momentary group, and I route the first left bus. I put it to the left side. You see it here. The signal is routed to the left side. The channels 1/3, 2/3 and 3/3 left, they are routed to the right side. Vice versa, the channels for the right side. The right is going to the right. The 1/3, 2/3 and 3/3 buses are going to the left. I have 4 channels which are responsible for my signals. They should be localized 1/3 to the left, or 2/3 to the left, or 3/3 to the left. What's happening? The left signal is going to the left master without any processing. The channels 1/3, 2/3 and 3/3 are going to the right master, and their processing is needed. As I told you before, they should have a decrease in the high frequencies, and that's what we are doing now. I need a high shelf equalizer on all these channels. That's why I'm making a momentary gain, and yeah, I have to go here in filter mode because this console has a high pass, a low pass, and a low shelf and a high shelf and 4 bands of equalizer. So switching here to the filter, then my shelf filter pops up here. The 1/3 filters will start at a frequency of 1.4 kilohertz, and I lower this amount by 2 dB. Because I made the momentary gain, the other 2 channels have it as well. Now I quit the momentary gain and only add 2/3 and 3/3 left to get to lower the high frequencies even more. Now I lower the amount of the frequency with 4 dB and lower the frequency to 1.1 kilohertz. And last but not least, only 3/3 is left. I lower the frequency with 6 dB at a starting point of 900, which is not possible here. So, okay, we have lowered with a permanent gain the high frequencies of all these 3 groups with minus 2 dB at around 1.4 or let's say 1.5 K. So this is done in all the 3 channels. First channel is done. Let's make a momentary gain on 2/3 and 3/3 left, and let's increase the value which we suspend from the high frequencies. So we go on minus 4 dB at about 1.3 kilohertz. Done. Now only 3/3 is left, which means that is my maximum position. I said earlier that minus 6 dB is absolutely sufficient to have the feeling that I localize a signal to the far left. And so this is minus 6 dB at a frequency of nearly 1K. So now you see we have these three different equalizations. Left is going to the left, and in panorama wise, 1/3, 2/3, 3/3 are going to the right. Let's go ahead. So we can add a very tiny amount on delay. So I will add a delay on all these three input channels. So this is done here. We have already again a momentary group for these 1/3, 2/3, and 3/3 left. I will insert the delay, and I will give a delay on 1/3, which is about 0.3 milliseconds. 0.3, hardly anything. 0.3 with 48 kilohertz, it means a delay of 16 samples. Done. So on the 2/3, I want to give a delay of approx 1.6 milliseconds, which is a delay of 32 samples. And 3/3 again, 0.3 something on top means we have a delay of 48 samples. We have now a delay on the 1/3 channels of 0.3 milliseconds. Here we have a delay on 2/3 left of approx 1.6, 1.65 milliseconds, and here 3/3 of 1 millisecond as a maximum amount, 1 millisecond. To be honest, why do I do that? These delay, because they are so tiny, they absolutely do not influence the people who are in a live venue just 30, 40 centimeters out of the middle. But these delays do not harm the people which are outside of this middle line between the speakers, because when you are on the far left side, maybe you're 10 meters away from the left speakers, but you're 30 meters away from the right speaker, which means a difference of 20 meters and about 60 milliseconds in time difference. So this 1 millisecond absolutely does not harm and does not have an effect. But it has an effect for the people who are exactly in the middle. And if I can give them an advantage, why not? So it does not harm, it only gives a benefit for a very few people. Very often people come, Carsten, that's your time difference panorama. No, it's not. There is a time difference in it, but it is the smallest effect of the whole panorama. The big effect is the decrease of the high frequencies. Now we did all the adjustments here. What we have to do is copy the equalization and the delay to the 1, 2, and 3/3. Just copy and paste. We can say, I want to copy this, copy the equalizer, and copy the delay. Where is the delay? Here. From 1/3 left to 1/3 right. Press OK. Next step. Copy the equalizer and the delay to 2/3 right. Copy. Done. And 3/3. Copy equalizer and delay to 3/3 right. So now we should have all the delays and all equalizers. So you see everything from the left side is copied to the right side. What is happening? If I want to have a first violin to be localized a little bit to the left side, I do not use the panorama of the first violin channel, because that is done by intensity difference. I don't want to use that. I use it for the send to the reverberation machine, but not for the send to the PA. what I do. The first violin is sitting a little bit outside the middle. And that's why I route it to the group monogroup, which is called left. The left group is routed without processing. You see no delay and no equalization. It goes to the left PA system. And I route it to 1/3 left. So the same signal is going to left and 1/3 left. The signal which is on 1/3 left, it's a tiny bit of reduced overtones, and has a tiny bit of delay. And that in localization, it gives me the localization of the first violins 1/3 to the left. The ground notes on both sides stay the same, because with my equalizer I'm above the ground notes. And that gives me a wonderful panorama, and yeah, it works. That's how I found my way to make a panning left-right for live situations, suitable and mono-compatible. I just showed you how to prepare the localizations about spectral differences and from the left to the right side. So the next step in preparation of the console is to assign all input channels to these single groups which are for the panorama. Okay, I already prepared that, and when we go in layer D, we have here the main microphone systems and the first three violin 1 microphones, violin 2 microphones. The way how I said it, it is we have 3 steps to the left and 3 steps to the right. So I have 2 coherent microphone systems, and with these coherent microphone systems I give this to fully left, fully right, fully left and fully right. Violin 1/1 to 1/3 and left, 2/3 and left is the violin 1/2. Violin 1/3 goes to left and 1/3 left. Of course, it's a pretty static routing. Feel free to make it even more precise with smaller steps, but in my experience, 3 steps to the left and 3 steps to the right is more or less enough for a localization of the whole orchestra. Okay, this goes through the whole orchestra. Every single channel is routed to the left and to the left, 1/3 left, 2/3 left, 3/3 left, or to right and 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. Okay, this is done. The next step I prepare is the high passes. Still have in your imagination, this is all prior the sound check. And all these steps I do is like a strict manual to make the sound check happening in a very fast way. So setting up all the high passes, I already did that here on all the channels. Of course, with different values. We have a violin, we have piccolo flutes, which are playing in a very higher frequency range than, for example, an upright. And of course, we have to take care about that. A way to adjust it very fast is with multi-select. Just select the first one and the last one you want to adjust, then go to the filter mode. It is, of course, in every console, it's somewhere different. And then you adjust the high pass. The advantage of this method is, for example, I have 4 channels of main microphones, and with that method, they are already all adjusted just with one single turn. And why I select all available channels is that I not always have to start from 0 again. So I'm already pretty much in the range where I want the button to be adjusted. So with multi-select, this is pretty fast. Of course, you can copy and paste some consoles that don't have a multi-select Some of them have a very convenient multi-select. It's depending on the console you prefer and you're working with. So, all high passes, all routing to the panorama is done. What is the next step? The next step, what I organize, is to adjust the deepness in sound. The deepness in sound is a very, very big thing, and this is pretty much independent whether I'm working on pure symphonic music, operas, or if I'm working on film music. First of all, I need a reverberation machine. Here I have this lovely 960, one of my absolutely favorite machines. What I do, I create 3 kinds of reverberation. All 3 have the same algorithm. And but then I make a few adjustments. So let's say about that. All instruments which should be located close to the audience come in a reverberation machine number 1. Then, which are mainly solo singers and all the string players. In the second reverberation machine, the middle of the orchestra is located, which means flute, so woodwinds, harp, piano, and the first rows of the trumpets, maybe if they're in the same row as the woodwinds, the first player of the French horns, and in the third machine, which should be the most far away machine from the audience, in that machine I give choir, I give percussion, and the last rows from French horns or trombones and tuba. What are the differences between these 3 machines? Very often when you ask people about how do you create deepness in sound, and they answer it's done by the pre-delay. Yes, the pre-delay in the reverberation is one of the big things you have to deal with, but it's definitely not the only one. Again, looking at the real world helps a lot to create these differences. If we look at the relation between the instruments which are very close and which are very far from the listener, let's just speak about all the things you can adjust in the reverberation machine. Instruments which should be located in close to the listener, of course, they have the bigger pre-delay, but there are more things to adjust in relation to the last machine, which represents the instruments which should be located far away from the listener. So, besides the pre-delay, you have the amount of early reflections. In the first machine, you have more early reflections than the reverberation itself. So I lower a little bit the amount of reverberation level, 2 dB, 3 dB down, and give a little bit more of the first reflections. On top of that, the reverberation itself, because in the real world the reflections travel a smaller way, so they don't lose as many high frequencies. So the reverberation itself has a bigger amount of high frequencies than in the machine, which is represents the more far away, which represents the instruments far away. Then let's compare the amount of direct signal compared to the reverberation of the machine. Signals very close have a higher amount of direct signal compared to the whole reverberation, including the early reflections. So that means I give a little bit less of these instruments on the send to the reverberation machine. On the far away machine, I give much more input to the machine. And so more reverberation, of course, is coming back. And then the last one I use on the reverberation machine itself is the length of the reverberation. That's not really the same in the analog world, or in the natural world, but it helps a lot. The reverberation for the instruments in the front, the length of the reverb is a bit shorter than the reverberation for the instruments in the back. I speak more or less, depending on the venue where I am, from a reverberation length of 2.1 seconds up to 2.7 or 2.4 to 3.3. A little bit depending on the music and of course depending on the venue, if there is already some reverberation in it or not. So I prepare all the sends already which are going to the reverberation machine. Let's prepare that. So here I have now my sends to fader, and as you see, it's with a multi-select, it's done very fast. I send all the signals, main microphone system, all the strings, I send them with a level of -10 dB to the Lexicon 960. Why -10? Because all these signals, even if my gain structure is good, these signals sum up. And when I put the send on -10, I'm not in danger of having distortions on the input of the reverberation machine. Let's go to the machines. So you see here, now I changed my double bass 2 and 3. They go with a send level of -10 to the reverberation machine. Now let's go to the send number 2. There I put all my woodwinds as well with a level of -10, as well my first trumpet and my first French horn, and as well, sorry, I have it here, all my mallets, so my piano and my harp. In the third machine, there's my send. I put all the instruments which are more far away. Again, -10 dB. So now all the sends are prepared to go into the reverberation machine. The returns of the reverberation for the beginning of the sound check are turned down, so that I don't hear them, of course. But that's not the last step with creating deepness in the sound. The part with the reverberation machine is done. Let's have a look at the direct sound again. The more I'm far away from the instruments, we have the attenuation by air, which causes high frequency to get damped. And that I'm just simulating. All my strings, I put a high pass on it, and that's it. Then the further I go in the orchestra, away from the point of view or from the listener, I just reduce a bit the high frequencies. As you can see here, I put a high shelf at 10K, and -0.5 I reduce the high frequencies on the on the flutes, on the oboes. The clarinets and the bassoons are a little bit more far away, so I reduce it 0.5 dB more. Just see, let's go back to the oboe and now to the clarinet. So you see the damping is happening much more, and this is how I go on and on in the whole orchestra. For example, here now you see the French horns, they are one step further, and this is just copying the natural world and stealing the instruments which are far behind, a little bit high frequencies. This works very well. especially when you have the whole orchestra equipped with the same kind of microphone, because the microphones themselves are different in the high frequencies. And when you use the same microphones on every place, you have a big advantage of this method to create that. Now, there's a last step I want to show you, and this is delaying microphones, spot microphones. There are many ways to delay spot microphones. For example, you know it in a rock band, you delay the snare 4.5 milliseconds to your overhead microphone, so that there is no time difference, and your snare gets really punchy. So you do a time alignment between overheads and snare. There are some people who are doing that in orchestras as well, but that means that you look where are the loud instruments, and to the loud instrument you delay everything. In my opinion, that's not a good choice. Everybody is free in his choice, and many ways lead to Rome. But that's not the real and not the right choice. So I just want to show you my way. In my way, I'm delaying the microphones towards the audience. Let's imagine how people in the audience are listening to an orchestra. I'm sitting in the 10th row. So I've maybe 10 meters to the first violin player, but I have about 18 meters to the timpani player. So due to the fact that sound is pretty slow with 340 meters per second, I hear the timpani player later than the first violin player, when they playing exact at the same time when the conductor gives the stroke. If I would now delay the microphone from the first violin to the timpani player, I would do it the way around, because I would wait until the sound of the timpani travels towards the violin player. So they had 8 meters, 24 milliseconds. The violin player would be later. That's totally the wrong way than the audience is listening to it. The listener in the 10th row definitely hears the first violin earlier than the timpani player. As soon as we place a microphone above the timpani and above the first violin player, the way to the loudspeaker for them is the same. So without any delay, they come out of the loudspeaker in the same time. But that's not what the listener is listening. And that's what I want to organize, or what I want to do. So I delay the timpani player by 24 milliseconds. The 8 meters, what he is later. 1 meter is 3 milliseconds, so it is 8 meters or 24 milliseconds. And this I do with every single microphone. I looking for a place where I would love to listen to the concert. From this place, something 7th, 10th, 12th row, from that place, I measure the distance to each single microphone. And as soon as I have all these distances, I can calculate it and convert it to milliseconds just by multiply it with 3. Of course, this will end up in a huge amount of delay, but I need the relations between all the different spot microphones, and that's why I can take the shortest distance I have to the listeners, most of the time the solo singers, and this distance I can subtract from every single spot microphone to reduce the overall delay. But I have the real and the correct relations between all the spot microphones, how they reach the listener. This is another thing, how I copy the real world. It is not about getting rid of comb filters and to avoid loud instruments bleeding in other microphones. It's a complete different thinking. It is, I am the listener, and I want to copy that, what the listener is able to listen, or what he has in natural, non-amplified concert situations. So giving this on top. Okay, that was my short explanation about delaying spot microphones. There are plenty and many ways other colleagues are working, but this is my way, how I do it. We have done the high-pass filters, we have done the routing, we did the delay of the spot microphones, we made the deepness and sound on the direct sound. So the only thing what we still have to do to be prepared for the sound check is turning on phantom power on every channel, because obviously I want to work with condenser microphones. We have to take care that the communication between me and the conductor in both ways is working. So we have to check that the monitor for the conductor and for the solo singers, that they are working. We know where the woodwinds are sitting. We know the delay to the monitor of the conductor, and we can add this short delay, 50 milliseconds. It will not hurt my communication with him, but it will help him to hear the woodwinds in a very normal and natural way in the case that he wants it. And we prepared the left and right side monitors, where I give, in the easiest way, I put the stringers, the direct signal of the players next to it, just a tiny bit on these speakers. Or I prepare another reverberation from a 960 or another machine and add some early reflections on these speakers. That means early reflections of the last first violin players are feeding the loudspeakers on the left side, and vice versa with the cello, double basses and tuba on the right side. With that preparation, only the gain and the balance is left. Let's wait for the orchestra. I will go on stage. I will do my welcome speech, and then let's do a very fast sound check, and let's have a look if that works. If I push the fader up with my DAW, let's see where we end. We try to copy the situation when we are directly now in the sound check. Of course, what I'm going to play now, we don't have an orchestra here, but we have a lovely recording of a concert, and this is what I gonna to play to you. So I just let the music run, and I will tell you what I'm doing. And this is more or less in the same time as it happens in the real world with the orchestra. So I let the computer run. I start with the first violins, and I let the first violins play. Of course, here now in that situation we have all strings together, but I can show you how I work. I'm listening after adjusting the gain to the first violin, and then I put the second microphone of this group up and I bring it, listening where is the right level. When do these two instruments melt together? And this is a very small amount of balance. And as you see, I raise the fader up and then I swing back, and I'm a little bit too loud, a little bit too not loud enough. And so these swinging gets smaller and smaller, and then I end up at the point where the balance is right correct. And then I add the third microphone. Done. So now I have 3 microphones of the first violin in balance. Here I have my VCA muted because the first violins are done. Then I'm asking for the second violins, doing just the same over and over. There we have a pizzicato, what they are playing there. Just the same. And the third microphone. Second violin's done. Thank you, second violins. Please, violas. Same again. Adjusting the gain always. The gain is already copied from the first violin to all other strings. Thank you, violas. Done. The cello, please. Thank you for the cello. Basses. Bass is done. So, with a small trick of swinging the fader forward and back, I really get a good, very fast way to find the correct balances. So, all single string sections are done. Now I ask the conductor to play the whole strings for me. I lower the volume of the high instrument, just leaving the basses. Now I'm working on the balances between the single sections. Basses are already up. I always start with the low instruments, going up, and now going to the high instruments. Cello. Done. Violas. Same, swing forward and back. Done. Violin 2. Violin 1. Okay. The strings are in balance together. Next step, reverberation. Sorry, I have it on the very far end of that console. The send is already prepared, so I'm raising the volume of the reverberation only for the strings. Done. Okay. I mute the strings. I have the VCA only for the strings. Next step is the woodwinds. I let the woodwinds play all together, so that's why I start with the bassoons. Strong bleeding, but you hear in the background from the bassoons. That's normal bleeding in normal bleeding of the sound in fortissimo. This is a little bit louder than the other. Oboe. Reverberation. I mute the VCA of the woodwinds. So, next step are the French horns. And then, let's go to brass. Let's mute the VCA for the French horn. Let's go to the brass. Tuba. Trombone. Let's wait until the trumpets are playing. Reverberation. Brass done. You see, my way of working, it repeats over and over. And as only the percussion, I let them play separate. And because there my way of doing the microphone setup is a little bit different, like the concussor, having a very close microphone to use the proximity effect. So after that, the strings are done. The level of the strings in itself is done. The reverberation is done. The only thing what is still missing is the balance between strings, woodwinds, French horns, brass, and the percussion. Let's do that now. So I go to the VCAs. I start there with the with the strings. Then that's what the music needs. And then I turn on that what the music right in the moment needs. It can be the woodwinds, it can be the French horns or the brass. Let's see. Here I can do the French horns to the woodwinds. And the woodwinds. See, as soon as I push the fader too far, I lose the deepness in the sound. Let me do a repeater. I push it 3 dB. The clarinet subtlety is here, but it should stay in the back where it should belong. So that's a little bit too much. Same with the French horns. So this is now a fine adjustment between all the different VCAs. But if you maybe remark, that's already the point of time where the orchestra is rehearsing. You see, the soundcheck itself just took maybe 5 minutes. The soundcheck itself took 5 minutes. And now I have a whole rehearsal to work on the very fine details. But imagine that. After maybe 5 minutes, does not sound too bad, does it? Ah, I forgot the main microphones. They have to be put on top to give the clue on everything. Done. They glue all the instruments together. Yeah, and now that's the time you do the balance. You walk outside the front of house, walk through the venue. If all the whole venue is fed well with a good sound, yeah, and just open your ears. Then once again, then mute the music and have a listen to the orchestra, how it sounds without any amplification, and then think about if your amplification is more or less the same how it is without when you're standing in front of the orchestra. More or less, soundcheck done, rehearsal done, ready to do the show. I want to show you my way of doing a soundcheck with a symphonic orchestra. First of all, you have to be extremely fast with a soundcheck. A lot of orchestra have a fixed time for the rehearsal. So there's not a single minute on top of that time. And as well, the rehearsals they had prior the concert, maybe they'd have been 1 or 2 rehearsals or even none. So they really themselves need the time to rehearse the program. As I mentioned when I talked about the organizing the console, the whole setup for the orchestra is already done. It's organized on the console. The only thing what you have to find out is the input level, so the gain structure, and the balances between all the instruments. But there's one thing prior the sound check. So Imagine the situation, the people of the orchestra, they come on stage one by one, and for the time when the rehearsal starts, then everybody is on stage. The orchestra, normally they tune the orchestra, and after the tuning there are always some speeches. The organizer of the orchestra will say some words, the conductor maybe will say some words, and so do I. After I welcome the orchestra, there are a few things I say to the orchestra. First of all, I ask them that they should a little bit move and they should look if the microphone stands disturb the musicians in playing. And this, of course, this must not occur. And therefore, I welcome as well my colleagues on stage and tell the orchestra, in the case that you are disturbed or cannot play freely because you are disturbed by a microphone stand, please go to my colleagues named and please tell them so that we find another solution for that single microphone. That's the first thing I say to them. The second thing is, please do not put any bags on the feet of a microphone stand. Or please have a look as well that you don't touch the microphone stands with your feet. Otherwise we will have this rumbling noises outside, where I can't do anything against that. After these words, I explain the orchestra how the soundcheck takes place. I normally start with the first violins, just a few measures. I adjust then at the front of house console, I adjust the balances and the head amp gain. Then I go straight to the second violins, then to the violas, to the cello and the basses. Don't forget after every single group to say thank you to the orchestra. Their music which deserve respect. After I had the double basses, I let the whole string section play. So to adjust the balance between the whole sections. For me personally, I can't explain why, but I always start with a low instrument, which means the double basses, and then I adjust the balance between the double basses and the cello. Then I raise the violas and so on until I have the whole string section. After the strings, we will come to the woodwinds. I'll let the whole section play in one time, because normally I use the same microphone for the whole orchestra. And when I found the gain on the strings, I just make a copy and paste to the all gains nearly in the whole orchestra. With some instruments where I don't do that, but most of the instruments then have the same gain, which makes me really fast. And so the whole woodwinds, I just use the situation to adjust the balance between the woodwinds themselves. Then I do the same with the French horns. Then, in one time, trumpets, trombones and tuba. Then together with the French horns. After that I will come to the percussion. The percussion needs a little bit extra time because the theory of having the same gain on all instruments does not work on the percussions. Why? As explained before, on the crancassa, I am very close with the microphone at the crancassa to get a positive effect from the proximity effect. And in the timpani, I'm pretty far away because I mainly need the high frequencies of the timpani. So, of course, this results in a different gain structure in the percussions, and that's why I need a different approach on the percussions. Before you start the sound check, you have to know where are the instruments of the percussions. Normally, an orchestra comes and the percussionists themselves set up all the instruments. And that can change even 5 minutes prior to the show. That's why when the orchestra enters the stage, go to the percussions and have a look where you placed your microphones and on which positions are which instruments. Because when you're then at the front of house 50 meters away, it gives the musicians a very good feeling if you say, don't play the instruments on the first position. It's much better when you say, please play Glockenspiel. And now please play triangle. And now please play snare or whatever. So this takes a little bit more time to have all the single microphones from the percussion. After that I do piano single, harp, celeste, and after that we come to the choir. Let the whole choir sing. Again, in the choir you can use the same gain settings as you used on the strings, and you only have to adjust the balances between the single voices of the choir. Whole process of a sound check in a symphonic orchestra shouldn't take longer than about 5 minutes. There are two good points about that. First, when you're very fast with your sound check, you surprise the musicians, because a musician, he or she does not want to sit there waiting for ages, half an hour, that a sound engineer has done his job and adjusted all filters. That's why I hardly use filters. So when you're done in 5 minutes, the musicians will feel like, wow, he's already ready. We can rehearse now. And so they don't have the lag of calming down and then have to raise again. The whole time they are there. And the second advantage of being fast is you have more rehearsal time. So 5 minutes for just finding the first balances, for finding your gain structure. And then I will say always through the microphones, thank you very much for the sound check. Now to the conductor, it is on you to take over. And please do not wonder if outside in the venue, in the first minutes of your rehearsal, the sound varies in the whole venue. It will become stable the more time I have, and then you get used to it. Thank you very much. Please, now it's your rehearsal time. And the rehearsal, I need a lot for making my fine adjustment, finding my best levels. When we are in the situation just a couple of minutes or a minute prior the concert, there are some things I try to do as often as possible. As soon as the orchestra enters the stage, in the case that there's some promotion videos or some background music, which more or less, to be honest, I don't like it. On symphony concerts you have music prior to the show. But in the case there is music, I mute it, so just fade it out, and let the orchestra enter the stage. Then sometimes it happens that the audience, they see maybe that the orchestra is entering the stage, but in classical concert it's common that you give a hand to the orchestra. And if this does not occur, I clap myself. I start clapping as loud as I can. Then, it's a thing of human beings, people surrounding me, they will start to clap as well. What for? Musicians are used while entering the stage that the audience is giving a hand. If not, as a musician, I can have the feeling that, the mood of the audience is not so good. And this, again, makes the musician feeling not comfortable. How can you make good music when a musician is not feeling comfortable? And that's why I just try the audience to give a hand, to applaud. And so it's everything as normal as the musician is used to. And then, of course, he has just a bit of feeling. It's just a tiny bit, but there are a lot of small, tiny things I do. And at the end, they will sum up to something big. Then, as soon as the musicians are on stage, they're on their seats, the they just fiddle around a bit before they tune. And this fiddling around is very important for me, and as well the tuning. That's the point where I start to open the PA or open the master VCA, and I'm below, most of the time, 10 dB below the point where I will be later on the concert. But the tuning and the fiddling is already amplified, and for the audience that gives the impression of there is already sound, and it helps me to have this sound natural. Imagine if I wouldn't do that. There's nothing, and then I just open the VCA with the very first note. Definitely the sound will come from the loudspeaker, and you have a feeling of an amplified show. But when I start with entering the musicians with the fiddling and tuning 10 dB lower, for the audience that is just a little bit normal. Oh, now it starts, now I hear something. And then for the first note I push the VCA to the level where it should be, and it's not the situation of having the sound coming directly from the loudspeakers, because the audience already got used to it. Another point is pretty important. Sometimes it happens that musicians just hit a microphone. So, because sometimes the stages are very narrow, they have to carry their instruments. And so it can occur that they touch a microphone and they move the microphone. Therefore, I always ask my colleagues on stage to go with the orchestra on stage and to have an overview of all microphones. And in the case that this happens, that they can interfere and go there and adjust the microphone back to the place where they belong.